guys, and welcome back to Crafty Quilt and Designs. Today I'm going to share with you my tips and tricks for getting your quilts completed. For those of you who have never done quilting before, do make sure you check out this video right now so you know how to get started. I'm going to show you how I base my quilts, what tools I actually use, how do I choose my thread, etc., what types of thread I actually use. So stick with me and I'll show you how to get your quilts started, especially if you're a beginner. So it's very beginner friendly. Now, let me show you the quilt. It is one of my UFOs. I did ask you, which one should I actually quilt, and this is the one that you chose for me to quilt. So it is all completed and looks really beautiful. Now there is something else I wanted to ask you before we move on to the video very quickly. So I know a lot of you probably think I'm really young. Well, I am. No, seriously, I am 52 years old and I have started my hot flashes and it drives me nuts. Now, when I was in England, I went to the doctor and she advised me was to drink soy milk, and that has been working. But lately, I sort of lapsed on drinking the soy milk a little bit, and it has returned with a vengeance. Is there anything else that I can do? Because I don't particularly love the soy milk. Don't get me wrong, I drink it when I remember. But is there anything else that you use out there? Sometimes it gets me really down. It's affecting my sleeping. So for those of you who are going through this process, and as I said, I know I don't look the age, but trust me, I am. And I just need some help. I really need some help because it is driving me bloody crazy. And I thought, who else can I ask but my subscribers to give me some tips or get me on the right track. So share with me what you actually use so it wouldn't just stress me out so much. I mean, during the day, during the night, it's like every 5 minutes, I gotta have the fan on, and then after the heat, then the freezing cold comes, and poor Carl has to sleep with a fan on because I can't not sleep with a fan on. So if you do anything out there differently, I'm really interested in herbal or anything safe wise. No tablets. I hate taking tablets. I don't like pills and stuff like that. But anything sort of natural that you do that actually help you. So please share with me. I'm looking forward to see what you say to me in the description box down below. Now, before you go, there is a giveaway, and I'll tell you more of the details in the description box down below and towards the end of the video, and I'll show you the quilt as well, so that hopefully you're really inspired, because the quilt I'm giving you is a quilt to inspire you to quilt. Okay, right, so with that being said, let's get on with it. Okay, so let's get started. All right guys, so I'm using my Birch quilting spray, no particular brand for any particular reason, but this is the one I actually use, and it works quite well for me. Now I have my batting already laid out here, and it's probably about 3 inches bigger than the quilt top, which is ideal. And the reason for that is to allow for movement of the quilt top when you start to baste it. Okay, now with your batting, depending on which you're using, I'm using polyester as well as cotton. They're not 50-50, but it's I think it's 80-30 or 80-20 or something like that. I can't remember. 70, I can't remember, but the ratio is more than one or the other. Okay, you can use any particular batting, but I like this one. It quilts well, and it shows up the quilting itself really easily. Now, if you can hear the fan in the background, just try to ignore it, because obviously I'm starting to feel warm yet again, just literally from that entry recording to now. Okay, so I have mine here. I have done a little bit of joining just to use up some batting, and I tend to do that for sort of quilts such of this nature, or if I'm making a scrappy quilt, I tend to sort of use up any sort of batting that I have left over. Okay, many times it's big pieces or small, I just join them together. Now ideally you should join them together using a zigzag, but to be honest, I've just did a seam line and I've just pressed it really, pressed it just to soften it a little bit, because sometimes it can be a little bit lumpy. So if you decide to take a shortcut, just make sure you put a little bit of steam on it. It does really soften it down. Obviously you can only do that if you're using the cotton batting, all right, the cotton and polyester. If it's just polyester only, I wouldn't advise you to do that. Okay, so my quilt top is already been ironed, and what I'm simply going to do is put it on top of the batting. Now just to talk about the batting a little bit further, is that I have it here on the bumpy side. Now there are two sides to the batting. There is a sort of a raised side, so i.e. it's a little bit rough, and then there's a smooth side. So the side that I'm looking at the moment is the rough side. Now you can start with any side, it doesn't really matter, but I tend to start with the rough side, and I'll tell you why. That's because when I put this quilt top down, it sticks to it quite easily. All right, so that means that, you know, it kind of stays in place a little bit before I start to baste it, and it helps to keep the quilt smooth. All right, so I have the rough side up. Now what I tend to do, put the batting on the table, and if you have something like this to work with where you can walk around the table, it's really good. Okay, it saves you from hurting your back, etc. You don't have to go on the floor, anything like that. So what I'm going to do is just try and find the middle of my quilt and the middle of the batting, so that I have again that extra going all the way around. And I tend to like flop it down so that I can see how much room I have. So I'm going to start on this side here. I think it's easy, I don't have to flop it in front of the camera. And again, I'm just checking that both sides have a little bit of extra batting, and it's literally in the middle. So all I'm doing now is just smoothing it off on top that batting there. That's all I'm doing, using my hands to just smoothen it off, or on I should say, not off. So I'm just smoothing, taking off any sort of rough air pockets and stuff like that, so that, and when I say rough air pockets, because sometimes the batting can move and it can be a little bit lumpy. So when I'm passing my hands over it, I'm also feeling for that also. I'm also pushing the quilt top so that it's nice and smooth. Okay, now I think that's fine, but what I'm going to do is move it, and that's one of the great things about working with a table such as this height. So you can use your dining room table if you haven't got a table like this in your sewing room. Okay, and again, so I can see that I have a little bit extra on the top here where if you go a bit closer, you can see whereby the quilt top is a little bit close to the end. I think I'm not going to worry about that. I think I'll leave it. I think it's going to be fine. I could move it. If I have to move it, it means I have to lift the whole thing and shift it down. But I think it's fine. I wouldn't worry about that too much. So what I'm going to do now is make sure that the end here is nice and flat, and again I'm just moving it out. I'm just shifting it down bit by bit. So this side I think is fine, so I'm just going to shuffle the quilt down and drag it down like so. And just by doing that, remember that area I showed you, the corner is giving me a little bit extra there, so I think that's good. I'm not going to worry about that. So I'm going to move it back now. Right, so I also use my iron, and you can see why it's important to be able to walk around the table, so that you can move the quilt and work in that manner also. Right, so I think I'm happy with this. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is get my spray out. Right, I'm going to move it in a sense that I can do half of the quilt top at a time. Okay, so it's nice and smooth there. I'm going to just just going to switch that fan off for a minute because I don't want when I spray the glue, it goes everywhere other than where it's supposed to go. Alright, so I'm just going to fold back. So I'm going to fold back to the middle there. That's when I tend to do this in halves. So I'll fold the quilt top back there so I can see that seam line of where I joined my quilt together. So that nice seam line there. And all I'm simply going to do, just making sure that the seam line also, or the quilt top is folded back to that seam line again on the side there. What I'm going to do is just then add some glue, and I add the glue to the backing. Okay, and I'm just going to move it down a little bit because I can do this other side. Don't worry about the glue drying or anything like that, and I'll tell you why. So that's fine. So what I'm going to do now is to gently bring it back over, and I'm going to baste it down bit by bit. So I know this is the area where I just sprayed. So what I'm going to do now is work my way down and across, and again holding that spot, putting it down nice and firm so that there's no creases. I'm just moving it all the way down again. What I'm going to do now is move the quilt back so I can glue base this side now. Moving it over, holding it, see me holding it at the bottom there, and just pulling it down. Okay, so I think that's good now. I'm going to move it and finish off the edges. Now I didn't spray beyond that mark, so I'm going to now spray my borders on there properly. Okay, now what I usually do at this stage, now it's glued down here nicely. I can feel the glue. I can see it stick on. So what I usually do now, just to make sure it's nice and even smoother, now I go in with my iron. And I don't have any steam in the iron, or no, if I have water, it's not turned to steam. And all I'm doing now is to further adhere it down. I'm just making sure I've ironed it on smooth. Now you don't have to take too much time doing this. This is just to make sure that it's on there, it's nice and smooth. I'm going right to the end. I'm coming all the way down. You can use your big iron, your small quilting iron, it doesn't really matter. All you want is a little bit of dry heat on there to just really smoothen out any wrinkles or any creases or anything like that. And this is the time you actually do that, just to ensure it's on there properly. So I'm just going to move the quilt over now so I can do that other side. Just bring that over. Remember, it's just half here. That's done. And again, from that marking point there, you just come all the way down. And I'm talking about the area where I've mentally and physically sort of sprayed and remembered where I am going to iron from, where the glue is at. And just come straight down. Just making sure it's nice and smooth there. And that's literally it. That is what I do to glue base my quilts. Now, once I've done the first half, I will just simply turn it around, or I will walk around on the other side. But since the camera is there, I'll just turn it around so I can do the other half now. I can even lift the quilt, flop it, and I know it's fine. Okay, I can clearly see that side is glue based. I can see that it's a lot more smoother. And all I'm going to do now is to lift this up back to the original part there where I stopped. So flip it on that side And one of the ways you know, because when you try to move this area here where you fold it back initially, it won't go because it will feel that there's a resistance because it's glue based already. So just checking that the side is fold over. I'm going to move the quilt over so that I have this edge to start with to glue based. And I'm going to do the same thing. This side is a bigger side now, and just spray. And I've always sprayed the batting because I feel that it adheres a lot more easily rather than on the actual quilt top. And what I also find is that sometimes if you're spraying, you can spray a little bit heavy, but it's on the batting, it's not on the quilt top, and then it can wet the quilt. But if you spray heavy, it's on the batting. All right. So taking my quilt, bring it over gently. I'm just going to pull this up so I have a little bit of room. And I'm going to do the same thing like I started. So I'm going to work from this edge since it's already in front of me. Just put it out to the side. And smoothen down with my hand just like I did before to take away any creases there. And notice I'm holding the quilt just to help me tug it so that it's nice and smooth. Get all the way down, all the way down. I'm going to move the quilt over so that I have room to do it. Remember that top half has already been done, so I don't need to worry about that moving. So again, come all the way down. And I can feel I have no lumps or anything like that from the actual batting. I can feel the batting is smooth. Move it over yet again. And just continue to adhere it down. Notice, look at me, I'm literally pushing all those air pockets out so that it's nice and smooth. This enables it to stay down. Okay, I'm just going to add a little bit more glue in the corner here where I can feel that I didn't spray there. I'm just doing the border edges. Again, go over that. And once I am happy, I then go back in with my iron. Now if you use your bigger iron, obviously you will get a bigger footprint of the iron down a lot more quickly. But I have my small iron on already to hand, so I will just use this one. And that is simply it, guys. That is simply what I do to glue baste. Alright guys, so let me just take you through a few things. Now I'm not sure where the gap is in your learning about quilting, but I'm going to start from the beginning, or at least from where I know, so that I can share what I know with you. Okay, so very most likely you will probably have some clue about the quilting feet. All right, so I have 3 here, and I just have a few, well, I have 4 in total, and I just have these variables because of the different sewing machines that I actually have. Now let's start with this one here. This is a small one, it's very tiny, and the needle goes right through that hole there. I like this one because it can give me just that area to look at. So for example, with this leaf here, if I wanted to just go over that, I can just follow that. And because the needle goes right through, it allows me to see where I'm going quite easily because of that direct focus with the needle there, straight through that really tiny hole. So that works for me, all right? The other one is this open toe here. You can see where it actually open in the middle there. I'll just bring that closer, all right? So with this one now, it then gives you a little bit of a more visual to move around on the quilt. Now, this one I tend to use, I call it the hopper, this one, right? And notice it's got a spring there, and that allows it to really go up and down, whereas this one does not have a spring. This little one here doesn't have a spring. It's just literally that direct motion you would use with the quilting. And I like this one for that particular reason. As I said, you can trace around something that's really fine with that. Okay, now with this one you have the spring effect, so that allows it to be bouncing, and I call this one the hopper because I find it literally just hops around. Now with the open toe, it does give you the opportunity to see a little bit more, as I said, but the reason I tend to use this one is because if I'm quilting a quilt that has lots of seams comes together, for example, if I'm quilting a star quilt, I will tend to use this one because I find that I can hop around all of those joints of seams, especially if it comes together in one bunch of area. Then I can hop around it rather than use this, which I may run into the fact of breaking the needle if I come around the point where all those seams are in a particular area on the quilt. So with this one, I can tend to do that and just hop around that seam area. So I call this the hopper. This quilting toe or quilting feet, I like this one because it's plastic, number one. Number two, it has a little bit of a red mark in between there. I'll just back up a little bit so the camera catches up. Hopefully you can make it out. There's a little bit of a red mark in between there, and that gives me sort of a measurement for my 1/4 inch seam. So for example, if I am quilting straightish lines here, I can then quilt my first line and use one of those red markers on that line to keep the lines consistently apart, okay, instead of getting out a ruler. So I like this one for that particular reason. All right, so those are the 3. I already have another one of this on the machine already set up and ready to go. Now with this manual machine, you do not get your tension sorted out for you, meaning it's not easily adjusted like in the Brother, because with the Brother I don't have to adjust the tension. It's set, I've always left it like that. If I change to quilting, it automatically does it for me. Whereas with this one, so if your machine is manual, I work with a position 9 here, and when it comes to these points up here, I don't interfere with them because they really govern whether or not you get a zigzag or a straight stitch. Now when you are quilting, you need to drop your feed dogs, which is at the back there. So the feed dogs are the little bitey sort of teeth that grabs the fabric through the machine. Okay, so you need to drop the feed dogs, and that's literally behind my machine. Now look at your manufacturer booklet and it will tell you where the feed dogs are. Okay, so you drop it, you have your bobbin ready, etc. Now I have my dial here on 9, and this is my tension here on 9. Okay, now as I said, with this machine, because it's manual, you need to set the tension. So what I did to get my tension correct is that I took 3 layers of fabric, and so i.e. just like if I'm making a quilt, I did the top layer, which is my quilt top, and my middle batting, and my backing. All right, and I just practice. Now you would know once you start playing around with your tension, you would know whether or not you need to upscale it or downscale it, i.e. increase it or lessen it. So I've noticed that 9 works for me, okay? Now, when you're adjusting the tension, you need to work in small increments. Now, I would say to you, this is a troubleshooter in the sense that you need patience. You cannot rush this process if you're working with a manual machine. You must take your time. Now, I don't use this machine for piecing, because I've already played around and got the tension settled. So I don't mess around with it every time I need to quilt, okay? Because it's already set. So I use my brother for piecing and this for quilting. So that's how I sort of bypass the fact that I have to keep adjusting the tension. So when I sorted it out the first time after buying the machine, I haven't changed it. It sits on 9 and that's it. And it works fine every time. Okay, so get a quilt sandwich together and trial the tension. And as I said, use strong thread or the correct quilting thread, the correct quilting needle and your feet. And obviously get your bobbin in there and just start practicing doing movements. Now, when you're doing that, i.e. when you're practicing to get the tension right, move fast, move slow, move medium, because you want to get the one tension that's suitable for all of those movements, because there are times when you will need to move quick, slow or medium speed, because remember, you are governing the stitches. When it comes to stitch width or stitch length, that is nothing to do with the machine, because you have turned that to 0. Those settings should be 0. So stitch length is 0, stitch width is 0, because you are now telling the machine you are in charge of making that movement for the stitches. Hence the reason why you drop the feed dogs, so that the fabric is not gripping it anymore. All right, so you are just freely moving it. I hope that makes sense to you. Okay, the other thing you need, or is advisable, is to have your distance from the needle to your throat space here is wide enough. I think mine is probably about 12 and a half, 13. So it's a beautiful space for quilting on this Quilter's Choice. I love this machine for quilting. Again, not being paid, just telling you what I work with and how it serves me to make my life easier quilting. Now, when it comes to the actual position in quilting, I used to sit when I started. I don't do that anymore, because I find that it allows my shoulders to hurt because I'm hunched over. Now that I have this center table here, and I tend to stand a lot, and I also feel that the machine responds better on a more stronger, firm surface. I find that if the table you're working on is not firm, I don't think the machine responds better. So I stand because I am now above, I'm above the area of where I need to see. I can see more, I can position my hands better, and I don't get that hunch over with the shoulders because I have a wider area on the table. Now, if you can sew on your kitchen surface, that's fine, as long as you clear things away, you know, you can sew there so that when you're not standing. And I do find that I quilt a lot more faster because I have the room to throw the quilt around, so to speak. So I'm not hunching it over my shoulders. And I also tend to quilt in rows when I do a quilt as you go, which is even faster. So those are the things I actually use, but definitely play around with the tension. Okay, if your machine is not computerized and it doesn't give you the tension automatically, play around with it. You must play around with it. And again, when I say small increments, I mean tiny movements. Just like a second movement. That's all you need when you're adjusting the dial for the tension. Second movement, just really, and then stitch every time. And even before you start the quilt, do it again just to make sure you're happy with it, and check the back. Don't just check the front, check the back just to make sure it's fine. Now, how you differentiate the sizes of your quilting stitches is the speed of your hands. So for example, if you find that you want longer stitches, then you move your hand a lot more faster. So if I'm quilting like that, my stitches will be longer because I am not slowing it down. If I slow it down, my stitches will be shorter and tinier. But you got to find the speed that works for you. I would say when you just started, just slow it down so that you can speed it up at a level, because remember, again, you are governing the speed. So don't press down really fast as if you're driving a car, because you will zoom off. Same with the machine, and then you won't be able to control it. Just find that middle medium speed that allows you to grow your confidence. Quilting is all about practicing. That's it in a nutshell. You wouldn't get it overnight, but I promise you, on your third quilt, you'll be fine. You'll know exactly what you're doing. All right, so let me now take you through what I'm going to do with the stitches or the quilting on the quilt itself, and I'll show you about 5 or so simplified quilting stitches that you can quilt your quilt with. All right, don't forget to stick around for the end of the video where I will show you a free giveaway for a quilt. All right, so let's move on to that now. All right, so before you start to quilt, it's best to come up with a plan. Okay, now what I tend to do sometimes is allow the quilt that I'm quilting to tell me what sort of quilting I need to do on it. Now, if the pattern or the print is really colorful, I will just do meandering lines. So meandering lines is just squiggly lines basically. So I will start and I will just move like that. However, don't go in the line. So if I feel I'm going in the line, what I will do is bend back and come back out again, bend back. And that is simply your meandering. It is just one long line that just goes all over. Okay, so for the meandering, which is number 1, I will do that in the borders here. I'll literally do a whole border as meandering because I don't see the point in doing anything too fancy. Now, for these smaller 1-inch lines here, I'm referring to them as lines on the quilt, but you know I'm talking about these little borders here. I am literally going to do some ribbon candy. Okay, so I'll label that as number 2, and all I'm doing is starting at the bottom, coming up and turning, just twisting like that. That's all I am doing, just twisting my hand and staying in line. Now notice here I'm climbing up. If I continue, I'm just going to keep going up because I have no measurement. However, because I have the width there already, I will tend to stay in that particular border. So I will start and touch and come back down. So it allows me to stay in that area. So all I'm doing is going up, turning over and come down. Go up, turn over, just like a musical note. Come down, return, come down, turn, and I will touch that seam line and just continue to do that. So that is what I'm going to do there for number 2. Once I get into this area here, I am simply just going to do some swirls. So that will be my number 3. So I'll just move over here. So number 3 pattern. And again, this is just my quilting pattern I'm moving forward. All right, so I'll do my swirls. So I'll come around, go in a circle, come back, just do a little hook and come around again and just continue with my swirls. That's all. And just keep going over. I can even echo that movement just to build up. Okay, go around, come back out, do a little peek, come back down again. You can even go in lines like that. If you want to do a little line, you just keep going in lines all the way. All right, so in this area here, however, when I get to the bigger squares of the quilt, I can then think about doing something a little bit more tricky. So for example, if I want to do some leaves, or I want to do some feathers, I will then start with my spine and do the little curve, and then I will then start doing my plumes. Okay, and just keep some touching and coming back, touching, and all I'm doing is bending around that curve every time and coming back and working my way right into it. All right, so let's try it now for real on the quilt and see how we get on. Now remember, this is not about perfection. Okay, you are a human being. You are the one who is quilting. You're not a machine. Don't expect it to be perfect. If you do that, you're setting yourself up to fail already. Don't do that, okay? So this is about free movement. That's why it's called free motion. It is not about perfect motion. So just take your time and quilt. If you make a mistake, go over that mistake again. So if you tend to do a square and you end up doing a circle, just make another circle around it. So whatever the mistake is, you do that same mistake, you echo it so that it looks intentional. All right, so I'm just going to come down and continue what I've started here. And I'm just taking my time and I'm doing exactly as I said. I go up, I touch, curve around, come back. Curve around, come back. And notice my curve was a little bit big there, but I'm not going to unpick that, okay? And when you're talking and quilting, your concentration is going in two different areas. So I do expect to have a little bit of mistakes on this quilt because I am explaining what I'm doing at the same time. So up, down. Okay, now, and you can then govern your speed. Now, I find that if I quilt a little bit slower, I tend to make mistake. So I've stopped there. So what I'm going to do is to just transition up to this part up here. So since I'm already, if I'd stop at the bottom, I would have continued with my meandering lines here because I've stopped there and I'm going to continue. I would have continued with my meandering lines. But since I've stopped at the top, I'm just going to continue and do the swirls. So again, swirl around, come back down. And notice I'm a little bit slower here because I want to make sure I get that movement a bit tight. And every little area, I want to make sure and try and echo it and quilt it. Just take your time, make that. Think of it as a snail. I'll echo back that movement, come back over again. I'm going to make a little swirl at the top there. And I'm going to come down like so. Go back up. Come around and tuck that in. And you can go either way. You don't have to go one way to make the swirl. Always, once you have made your movement, always, and if there's a gap, you come into that gap so that you can fill it. And I'll show you what I mean. So for example, like there, I need to change my bobbin. I should have done that before I started. All right, so let me pause, change bobbin, and I'll come back. All right, so I've already changed the bobbin. So let's get started on that. Now, what I would say, you would really need to have an up-down feature on for your needle if you have a manual. That makes it just a lot more easier. So when you stop, the needle goes into the fabric. Excuse me. All right, so that's really helpful. If it tends to hover or it stops up, you then always have to readjust and make sure you start back where you stopped. But if it has an up-down feature with the needle, you don't have that issue. Just make sure it's on. Right, so I'm just gonna take off my tail end here. I'll do a starting stitch like so, and I will just do it. Now you can move if you want to do that starting stitch to make sure it's, you know, it stays there, but I don't bother with that. I just do it on the one spot and then I continue. Okay, so what I was actually saying is that when you make the movement and if you have a gap, you just come into that gap just so that you cover it. Okay, now I am not going to quilt this area here at the moment. What I am going to do is go up into the bigger block. I'm just going to travel back. And when you're traveling back, and what I mean by that, if I want to reverse where I came from, I would just do like a curve movement rather than a straight line. So it just looks like something. Okay, so for this one, I'm going to do a little bit of a paisley. And as I move forward, you'll see I move forward quilting, you'll see the quilt coming towards me. So I am quilting forward, but the quilt itself will reach back towards me. Okay, so I'm just going to do a nice long curve there. All right, in fact, what I am going to do is quite a lot of different quilting within this block, so it'll make a lot more easier to get to the idea around. So I've just done a little bit of a curve there, and I've come in a little bit tighter. So what I'm going to do now is just do a little curves all the way around to fill that area. And all I'm doing is just touching and coming back out, making like a flower-like movement. Remember, this is not about perfection. All right, what I'm going to do now is travel back again, come all the way around, cover it again. And I'm going to branch down there, come down there as well, then go over on the other side. And I'm going to start some swirls here, and I'm going to tuck it in. Now at this point, all I'm thinking about is just filling that space. All right, so again, make a little bit of swirl right there. Now I want to get away from this now. I'm tired of doing that. If you change your mind, then what you can do, now remember, you don't have to stick to one quilting pattern. You can change it up as much as you like. So what I'm going to do now is a little bit of a paisley. So I'm going to just do a little swoop, come down, and then I'm going to do a little leaf around it. And then if I want to do a swirl again, come back into swirl, come back out. And then if I want to do another paisley, again, come there. And all I'm doing is echoing, and I can keep going over that as much as I want. Now I have a little bit of a gap there, and what I'm going to do is come down and echo it, and again go around with some swirls. And all I'm going to do is make a bit of a paisley. Okay, now you can stop and think about where you want to go next, what you want to do. Do you want to go back into this flower pattern? Then again, you can make a little swirl and then come around again. Fill that gappy area. And what you need to do is think about movements can get you back to like areas where you left unquilted. So that now I can travel back around there and quilt this area, echo back down, come up and finish all the way around here. So what I'm going to do now is a little bit of leaves. I'm just going to make some leaves. And I'm going to echo that again, come back down. Remember to fill any little area before you move on. And so because I'm already doing this quilting pattern in here, I am going to do that to travel all the way back over on this side. Or I can just come in here, go up again and come back around, fill this area and be done with it. Now What I tend to do sometimes when I'm quilting is to simply just point. I write, well, because I'm right-handed, and sometimes I have to readjust the movement in my brain so that I get it right. So then, because I know if I'm starting on the left side, I can just go up, down quickly. But now I have to readjust my brain and think, all right, I'm starting on the right-hand side now. So do I start at the bottom? Do I come up? So then I'm going to go up and then come back down. All right, so I'm going to go up, come back down. So it just really is readjusting the brain to make sure you know where you're going. All right, so literally back where we started. So let's take that out and see how it looks. It doesn't look too bad. The most important thing is that the square is filled. All right, so let's move on to another area now. Now, because this area here is very full of print, I am not going to worry about doing anything like that in there. So in this area is where I will do the meandering lines or straight lines. Now notice I clipped at the top, but I didn't clip at the back. So which means is that I will have a long thread probably starting around there, because I'm going to position the needle there. So I'm going to have a thread at the back to trim when I'm done. Now that doesn't bother me because I already go to the back of the machine and clip the threads anyway, so that doesn't bother me. So I know that's a thread at the back there to clip. All right, but it's up to you. You can lift it and clip it, doesn't really make any sense. No fuss really, it really depends on you. So for this one here, I'll do swirls as I usually say, or I can just do squiggly lines, which is another one I tend to use if I want to do squiggly lines, again to fill the quilt. So squiggly lines for me is just this, just that. And again, I'm using those two little markers there on my quilting feet just to guide me through, to keep the distance or the width between those lines semi-accurate. I am not precise about it. So I'm just moving up and coming back down. If you want to go at a diagonal way, you can. You twist it up a bit. Come back down. And all I'm doing is just jiggering my hand like that. That's all I'm doing. And then I move it. I travel along that same line, come back down again, move across. Just move your hands. That's it. Travel down, go up. Alright, and because I know I've left a spot there, what I'm going to do now is simply start quilting that wishbone again to get back to that area. So I'm going to go down, come up, come back to that spot, finish off that quilting. Okay, so again, back to the area where I started initially. I can now do my meandering lines. So remember those meandering lines, these squiggly lines at the top here. So then I will come down and just stop. Just move around. And don't move too fast or too slow, because again, that governs the stitches you want. Just keep it consistent. I listen to the machine to hear the sound of that consistent flow that I want. And that's it. You just keep moving around. Try not to miss any space or to leave any spaces behind. If you do, go back and fill it. So you'll go back in. And again, you can just echo that particular movement. Just echo it. That's all you need to do. Always echo. Go in and out. Think of the big belly moving in and out like waves, like a snake just moving all over, squiggly lines. And you come back on yourself. Just keep moving as you go. And we're back where we started. So that's literally about it. Now, notice how I'm moving the quilt because I've got room on the table to do so. Okay, and what I can do now is go back, squiggle my line back down there, and I'm now back in this area again where I was going to initially. Now with this one, you can simply do the squiggly lines, or you can do swirls. Again, it doesn't really matter because you're not going to see the quilting. I only tend to try and do the feathers or the roses, the paisley, the leaves in the areas where I can actually see the quilting. These particular areas, I will probably do swirls. Yeah, I will do meander because you can't see it. So no point putting any efforts into these areas. It just doesn't make sense to do that. You can if you want to, but no one's going to see it, only at the back. So what I tend to do is do a little bit of meander, then some swirls, meander, swirls. Just mix it up so that when I turn the quilt around, it looks like something. That's all. Alrighty then. Now another one that you can do is simply up and down lines, and that's another easy one to fill any dark areas. Now what I really wanted to show you is an easy way to do a feather. I have done this already in one of my videos, quilting videos, or how to quilt your quilt videos, which I will link for you to see, but I don't think I've got any more light areas of fabric or squares to show you. So I'm going to move over to this square here. Alright guys, so the quilt is completed. This courtyard quilt measures 54 inches squared. Now let's take a look at the quilting that we actually did together before I show you the majority of the quilt. So the first square we did was this one here. So you can see the flower where we started off with firstly, and then I branched off and did other things with it. Okay. Now remember to echo your movement. I'm going to show you a slight mistake that I made on this particular block. So if you look very closely here, you can see there's a mistake there. But all I did was just echo that into a shape. Now if I come all the way back, you don't see that. Hence the reason why I said if you make mistakes, just to echo it. Okay, on these patches here, I did swirls, as you can see. And on the inner sashing, you can see what I did there. Remember for these blocks here, not much of an, you can see it kind of clearly on the camera, but if I were to go further up, you probably wouldn't see the indentations of the quilting lines. Okay, so hence the reason why I tend not to fuss about it. But you can see I tried to do a feather here, but it doesn't come through. On this particular one here, you can see that feather swirl there. That looks really beautiful. I'm really happy with that. Overall, the quilt looks absolutely gorgeous. Really, really beautiful. So take your time when it comes to the quilting. Don't rush it. Remember, repetition is the key in this case. So on this area here, a bit of ribbon candy, and always allow the blocks to govern what you actually quilt. So again, just back and forth lines here. Ribbon candy, as I stated here. In these blocks, I just did some triangles. So overall, not too bad. On the borders, as you know, I just did meandering lines, as you can see it there. But I'm quite pleased with the outcome. Beautiful quilt, easy. This is a courtyard quilt, as I said, and I'm going to link the video up there so that you can actually see how to make it. You can even use layered cake for this, and then use scraps or layered cake, and even a jelly roll strips that you actually have lying around. But overall, absolutely gorgeous. I really, really do love it. Let's turn over to the back and have a look. Look at this one. Oh, just did paisley there. Absolutely gorgeous. Now, before I turn around to the back, I want to see if I can find an area whereby the stitching is a little bit dense and where it actually is spacey. So in this one here, I do feel that the stitch lines are very tiny. So here, in this particular block, I was moving very slowly. So remember I said, if you move slowly, the stitches are going to be very small. You can see that there. Okay. If you move a little bit faster, if you look at these ones here, it's a little bit bigger than the one I just showed you. All right. But all of that control comes with practice. Practice, practice, practice. At the back, you can see all of those quilting lines, and I've used a beautiful doggy print, which I absolutely love. It looks brilliant. One of the great things about using a plainish back is that you can actually see the impressions of the quilting, which looks absolutely gorgeous. Now, if you don't want to show that, you can obviously use the same color, which will blend into the backing fabric. But I really don't mind. It doesn't bother me at all. So guys, I hope that this tutorial has helped you to learn a little bit more about quilting and to grow your confidence. Definitely. Now, let's talk about the quilt giveaway. And this is a quilt I want to give away. This quilt is a bed runner, and I've used this quilt just so that I can actually practice my quilting. When I made this quilt, it was just to practice my quilting on. And obviously I'm a lot better now. So if you would like to have this quilt, you can look at all the techniques I actually did just to help you get there. So I'm happy to give this away to somebody who would like to grow your skills, and you can look back and see how much better you have grown. I mean, if I look at this feather here, in looking at my feathers now, I can see how much I have actually grown. But when I did this, I wouldn't call myself, someone who can do free motion quilting. I was definitely learning. Okay, and this is the reasons why I always say, if you use fabric with lines on it to practice, it allows you to simply just get that precision right every time, because by then you'll be so used to it. Okay guys, so if you'd like to be considered for this, all you need to do is follow me on Instagram and obviously be a subscriber on YouTube. Leave me a message saying that you'd like to be considered for the quilt giveaway, and I'll be sure to put you in the draw. So that's it for now. If you'd like to see more videos just like this, please consider subscribing and I shall see you next week. Love you guys. Thanks for watching. Bye for now, and happy quilting, guys.